Shut up and sit down.
What up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Master the NEC, where we talk about the National Electrical Code and all things electrically related. My name is Paul Abernathy, your host as always, and welcome to the podcast. On today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about codes and standards. Obviously, I've been in that industry for quite a few years now, and helping develop a company's codes and standards team from nothing to where it's kind of one of the pillars of the industry when it comes to response time and involvement in things like standard development. It's kind of learned quite a few things along the way. And what I have learned is that to be a player in this industry, whether it's manufacturing or some type of code and standard development, you have to be one of those people that are just not always a nice person. I mean, you have to be very forceful in your approach in order to make sure that the standards and compliance moves forward. And sometimes people judge you differently. But what I will tell you is that any manufacturer who is playing in the manufacturing game and their products are subject to standards, development, ANSI standards, UL standards, NRTL standards, and of course, installation standards and things like that, like the National Electrical Code, which is a minimum safety standard, and other types of things. You really have to make an effort as a company. Otherwise, you get stagnant. Now, you're going to get your sales, but you're not going to grow. And I think over the past nearly 8 years that I've gone from being a very generalist in working, previously working for NEMA, and then building that understanding of how it works, and then working for a major manufacturer that is a publicly held company, to understand the politics that are involved in a company, and to work and really focus on developing a codes and standards division, which wasn't there before. Kind of just handled issues, but never really had a platform in place to handle and do training and resolve stuff. You learn a lot, and you learn that there's companies that are that are manufacturers that do have products that actually are out there in the industry, but they really don't have a robust codes and standards team behind it. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about it, kind of give you some insight in my coming up on nearly a decade of working in this. When you add the work in the private sector versus the work at NEMA, putting all that together, it's right at a decade. And also throwing in the fact that I've been a master electrician in multiple states, and you can kind of see, and I've been an inspector, and I've been a supervisor of inspections and an engineer for a city. You put all that stuff together and you kind of see how they start to mesh together, because, in codes and standards, you have to literally work with inspectors, building officials, other manufacturers when it comes to their standards and compliance and NRTLs, and you have to learn. And I was blessed enough to have my foot in a little bit of everything. And that's kind of rarity in this industry. You either come straight into manufacturing, but I am blessed to say that I've been able to look at from both sides of the fence multiple times. And not just from a contractor's perspective, but from being in the manufacturing industry, but then being a representative of the manufacturing industry. And then also from a inspector or building official type of position, so I can see how these things kind of meld together and play all sides of the fence to kind of develop what I've learned. So that's what I want to share with you today in this episode. But before we do that, before we get into the meat and potatoes of understanding what codes and standards is and how every manufacturer should have a division and how important education plays in this, because again, that's sometimes overlooked, I need to run a commercial. Again, I thank all of you for listening to our podcast and watching my videos over on our YouTube channel. And I also thank everybody for their patronage over on Electrician Pride, which is our merchandise store. It's also available through, masterthenec.com. You can see the merchant link up there at the top on the navigational bar. But we appreciate you. These are one-off products. All of the designs are made by me personally. All the designs, the master electrician, journeyman. So again, I appreciate it. Wear your pride. But let me run that commercial, and then we'll get into today's podcast. Today's show is sponsored by electricianpride.com. your one-stop shop for electrician-specific t-shirts, hoodies, phone cases, mugs, die-cut stickers, leggings, and so much more. Featuring unique designs for electricians, journeymen, and master electricians, as well as electrical engineers and electrical inspectors. For more information on all the products that are available, visit us at www.electricianpride.com today. All right. Well, again, check out electricianpride.com. A lot of great stuff and more coming all the time. In fact, I think there's over 200 products in there now, from polo shirts to jackets to the Gods of Current, my latest design, which is just awesome. I love it. In fact, I have t-shirts and polos and hats with that design on it because it's just the coolest design. Okay, so let's kind of get into it. So most people know that I started my journey as an electrician many, many years ago. Of course, it's like anything. Once you're an electrician, you learn your trade, you learn your craft, you never lose it. Technology keeps moving forward. You keep learning new things, new products, and manufacturers are constantly coming out with new products. And some of them fill a niche. Some of them fill certain things that you always went like, God, why didn't somebody create this? And of course, the manufacturers step up and do create it. And so you have to adapt and start to understanding there's a lot more behind the scenes when it comes to things like codes and standards and development. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Now, I was blessed to work for NEMA, a great organization, National Electrical Manufacturers Association. So I've got to see behind the scenes at how the manufacturers work and what their intentions are and how they develop things, and what's the motivating force and driving thing behind the codes and standards and how they do it. Been able to sit in on a lot of codes and standards meetings through the NEMA process. It's a good old boy system, but I'm telling you, they do have the best intentions at heart when it comes to development and product and getting it out there and things like that. So I just want to talk a little bit about codes and standards and why it's so important. And of course, most people know that I am the manager of codes and standards for Encore Wire. And it's a wire and cable manufacturer located in McKinney, Texas. Great company, ran by CEO Daniel Jones, which is the real reason I came to Texas was to work with Daniel Jones and some of the VPs that got me here. And so when I came to Encore, there was really no codes and standards division. It's kind of like if we have issues, we'll just resolve it and do it the best way you can, right? There was no formalized approach to it. There was really no way to take it and do problem solving and root analysis and get from point A to point B, because again, we care about our customers, but again, we are a company and we produce products. So creating that from the scratch, and they had a great guy there anyway. I don't know if Kevin Porter worked there prior. Really wasn't from the electrical industry. Did a wonderful job and still does today. Works for me there. Great guy, sweetheart of a guy who his main focus is the standards, and he's in a lot of committees. Okay, he's sitting on committees all the time, helping develop the standards, and we'll talk about that a little bit about what codes and standards does. And I'm always in close communication with Kevin, and he's a sweetheart of a guy. In fact, I didn't even get permission from him to even mention his name on here, so hopefully he doesn't get upset. But it takes quite a few people to create a really good team. And me and Kevin are a great team. I look at the big picture, and Kevin focuses on what we need to get done at a task, especially in the standards realm. And he leaves the code part to me for the most part. And we interact and we have a lot of feedback and dialogue. And that is what makes the codes and standards team at Encore Wire so special. Because we tackle things very quickly and we have solutions to problems. We don't take problems and mound problems on problems. We have solutions and we have ways to overcome these type of things. So that's what makes a good codes and standards team. So let's talk about a little bit of what is done. Now, there's a lot of other manufacturers in this industry, whether it's from the lighting industry or in the wire and cable industry, all different types of industries. And all of them should have a robust codes and standards team, where they have one person who's kind of driving the ship, but it takes others to help keep that ship going straight, right? Keep the engines flowing, keep the stoves with the coal, if you will, keeps everything moving. And so one of the things that I always tell people is that every manufacturer that's going to take products and they're going to actually take it to market, one, you're always going to be a target. Okay. People want to sue everybody for any reason. So for me, having a deep background in the National Electrical Code and, of course, in the inspection industry and, of course, in installation, it's easy to be able to resolve a lot of issues or give advice on how to do this and how to do that, because not every electrician is seen all the different types of potential installations that they might run into. And I've just been blessed that I've been fortunate through the number of years, over 30 now, that I have been involved in some facet of the inspection, the installation, the repair, the development, manufacturing, that I tend to bring all those things together and help. So that's what a good codes and standards team does. And every company needs a codes and standards teams, because what happens is the old saying, and I think Kevin coined this, they will need you before you need them. So we're always ready for the next thing that we need to assist somebody in, whether it's our customer, the end customer, the installer. You got to be able to help them. And that's the most important thing, is very customer service centric. And that's the thing that I think really can make a codes and standards team stand out, right? Is that ability to help the end user the best they can. So when you think about codes and standards, there's a couple things that they bring to the industry, and every manufacturer should have it. In fact, I can think of a couple wire and cable manufacturers who are not really big players in the game, but they could, because they have all the tools, but they don't really have a good codes and standards team. And if they did, if I had them in my hand, you could turn them into the next thing, right? And so they don't. And a lot of other manufacturers of other products are the same way. They're right there on the cusp, but they're so focused on ROI, they're so focused on the sales part of it, that they're not really focused on the image, the codes and standards, the quality control that comes from a codes and standards, the education on the product that can give an authoritarian type of approach to people using their products that helps build brand awareness and growth, is sometimes lost. And that does come from codes and standards, believe it or not. They are the ones that carry the mantle, because what happens is the customers don't care about the flashy websites. They don't care about the packaging. They care about how you install the product, how it was made, whether it's compliant, and whether or not it's going to get the job done. And they need people that can tell them that it's going to get the job done. And that's what codes and standards does, right? So what do we do as a codes and standards industry? It's because I know people ask all the time, like, what do you really do as a codes and standards folk? Well, we make industry awareness of products, installation practices, compliance, non-compliance. Codes and standards also very heavy, believe it or not, in what's called conflict resolution. Means that not everybody's going to use a product as it's intended, or they're going to have questions on how a product is to be used. And the best way, and you've heard me say this before on other podcasts, the best way to ensure compliance to an installation is to reach out to the manufacturer and ask them, is this a compliant installation? And now a good, savvy codes and standards person can tell you whether something would be compliant or not. And you can always tell a good codes and standard person because they've done it. They put their hands on it. I still have the cuts on my hands from actually installing every product that Encore Wire makes at some point in my career. Okay. So that's something that you kind of, for me, I've just been blessed enough to have these experiences. Now, back early in the day, my mother or somebody would say, you got to stay somewhere longer. You can't be there you got to be there more than 3 years. You got to build a future. I get it. But what it did for me was allowed me to do the electrical. It allowed me to do the inspection. It allowed me to do the management or supervision. And I have a unique management style. Kevin will tell you. I'm not there to be people's friend. I am not there to build relationships and be kissy, kissy, huggy, huggy. Let's go play golf. I'm there to get something done. I'm there to see the company grow. I'm there to see, I'm there to build a codes and standards teams that can be the pillar of the industry. That's what I do. Okay. So conflict resolution becomes a very big thing because, again, you have to be able to walk that line. Next is product development. Now, obviously, with Encore, I have multiple products that have my name on it from patent standpoint. I think a misconception that people have about patents in the industry: when you create a patent for a manufacturer, that's their patent; they own it. Your name's on it, and they might dump a bunch of other people on it as well, because that's just how it works. If anybody's hand touches something, they want to be on the patent, and that's fine. But most of the time, the concept comes from certain individuals. And so in the patents that I'm on, these are my ideas, but we have a team behind them. And that's the key. We're all a team. And so it never bothers me who's on the patent. It's a team. So product development, believe it or not, comes from the eyes of a codes and standards. Now, it might get done in an R&D, research and development stage. Then there's different pieces of it that you have to do. But at the end of the day, the concept has to come from somebody that actually has experience. And in a lot of cases, the codes and standards team are the ones with the experience, if you have people that actually touched it and did it. And that's a difference. I come from a background where I worked up from trade through manufacturing, and you learn the ins and outs. You have relationships. You learn from other people. You make friends, you make enemies, but at the end of the day, we're all searching for the same goal, right? We're trying to better our company. That's important. The next thing that we do is codes and standards, obviously, as it sounds, is very heavy in the standards development. So I tell people all the time, if you don't have a codes and standards team that is heavily involved in the standard development, then you will get left behind. You will be left behind at some point because, again, industry as it is, manufacturers, there's always an angle in every meeting to try to position your product over somebody else's. And if we can use the natural lay of a code or the natural lay of a standard and build a product around that you can idolize your product by making it a little bit different, but then something can happen in a standard that kind of positions your product as the product, and it disenfranchises the other manufacturers. And so you always have to be there to make sure that when the standards are developed, that it is developed neutrally and it doesn't give a product an unfair advantage over somebody else. So we're constantly watching that and constantly making sure that the standards are fair across the board. Although, any manufacturer, we'd lie if we say it isn't a method to try to game up the system or game up your competitor, coming up with different gimmicks and things that from the electrician standpoint, they might look at it and go, that doesn't matter to me. But from a manufacturer standpoint, it's all about marketing. It's all about promotion. It's all about, you can take a negative on your product from somebody else's product, and if you position it right, it becomes a positive. And you just have to know how to do that. And that comes from a codes and standards team who give the feedback. Now, they don't always get the credit. Trust me, I know this. But they're the ones that give the vital input that gets the ball rolling. And so that's important. If your company doesn't have that, it might be the reason why they're doing well, but they're just not doing what they could. They could be a bigger or more impactful change in the industry. And you've got to get the right codes and standards people in to do that, people that are familiar with that. For example, I started a team from zero, pretty much. It wasn't dedicated to codes and standards, and taking it to what it is. And I'm very proud of that. And it took teamwork to get it to there. It took commitment by everybody involved. But it's not an easy task. But every large manufacturer should have this. And I shudder to say medium level manufacturers need it as well, because they want to get to the next level. But standard development is key. And in our company, Kevin Porter is dealing with the standard development. He comes to me when there's an issue and we want to discuss it and we formulate a game plan. But at the end of the day, Kevin is heavily involved in the standard process, working with NEMA, working with ANSI, working with any of the standards that have to do with our products, that type of thing. Okay, so standard development is really important. Next is use compliance. Now, for our company, use compliance, when I say our company, Encore, use compliance is critical. And that's the element that I also bring, because I know how all these products are to be installed. I know what the code compliance is for it, but I've also installed it. I pulled conductors in cable trays. I have ran tray cable. I have installed our individual insulated conductors in raceways of various types. So I know how to pull it. I know what you might interact with a tugger. I know these things. And so I'm able to then shift hats and say, well, I also know it from an inspection aspect of it and what an inspector might look at and what you need to be very conscious of and what you might run into. So just be aware of this. And then, of course, putting on the manufacturer's hat. You look at it and say, well, we have to manufacture this. So one, it is less chance of installation error. How clear are we on the installation instructions from the manufacturer? All those type of things have to be thought of. And then how, of course, are we going to promote this to the industry and able to have somebody look at it and say, this is very compliant and that's what I want to use. I want to use that product. So it is, I mean, we work a lot also in marketing, in creating the scripts or what gets done in marketing or reviewing something to see, well, you don't want to put something out there on the internet and everything lives on the internet. You don't want to put something on the internet that's incorrect and then it lives with you. And then your competitors will use that to their advantage, some more than others, that type of thing. So use compliance is a huge thing when it comes to codes and standards. Making sure that the products are being installed, because I'll tell you what, if you don't install a product and you say you manufacture a widget and you do not use that product in accordance with its intended use and something happens, I can guarantee you 100% that a good codes and standards team, and I can tell you, Encore, they're going to send me in, and I'm going to go in there and I'm going to analyze and dissect every aspect of your installation, what you did, what you used, what you did wrong, and I will use it against you. And if it ends up in court, I will 100% use that against you. Okay, I'm there to protect my manufacturer, absolutely. And of course, we want you to install products in accordance with their intended use. And that's the whole point, right? The next thing that I think about with codes and standards is technical experts. Technical experts. Luckily, most manufacturers will have somebody in their company that's a technical expert. And for Encore Wire, I'm the technical expert. And because I cover broader, overseeing codes and standards, but industry awareness, conflict resolution, product development, standard development, and giving guidance where necessary and allowing people to do what they're good at. That's the key. Let the people do what they're good at. And again, that's all part of management and your management style. The use compliance, so critical. That's all part of a technical expertise, making sure somebody installs something. And again, it's not me. I'm not talking this to say me. I'm saying in general. A good codes and standards team has the ability to lead a team, but also be a key motivator in things like technical expertise and use compliance. You can't really be an effective codes and standards leader, if you will. You can't go to meetings and get your message across. You can't go and have people in the industry know who you are if you've never gotten your hands dirty. It's tough. I'm telling you. It's tough. You can be a product manager. You can do different things like that. But if you've never gotten your hands dirty in it, it's very tough to be believable, very convincing, especially if you're doing standards in development work. It's difficult. And so you have to bridge that curve. One of the other things about technical expertise is that all manufacturers are very keen about getting on engineering specifications. I tell people all the time, one of the most important things for the industry and for growth is to make sure that the engineers are actually speccing your products. And I go through an awful lot of specifications. And I created a program for Encore Wire called Project Specification. It's a specific targeted way to go after engineers because, again, Encore Wire makes a premium product. It's exchanged on the New York Stock Exchange, ticker WIRE, in case you haven't checked it out. A very high level of quality control in our product. It's all made in McKinney, Texas. Those are all benefits. But if you're not on a specification and an engineer is not putting you on there for some reason, even though you're one of the leading manufacturers in the industry, there's a reason, and you want to make sure that you find out why you're not on it. So I created a program because, again, I'm very proud of the wire we make, and we should be on all specifications by every engineering firm. However, there are other manufacturers out there that I notice are not on this list. And there's a lot of differences from spec to spec. And whether they're using a master spec, which, again, people don't understand. Master spec is a process of writing a specification for projects, but once it's done, you print it off and it can bounce around an engineering firm for years without getting updated. So it gets outdated. Whereas you have other things like SpecLink, for example, that actually are updated in real time, and the engineers are actually developing the spec online, and they choose which manufacturers they want to be on their specification. And so it's a fluid living document until it's finally used for a project. But what I notice is that there's a lot of manufacturers that have really good products, but they are not there. And they lack a good codes and standards team to push a plan to grow. And I think that's the number one thing that I see with a lot of companies is that they're not going to get the industry growth or the market share that they would really like or what they could see available because they spend way too much time on just the sales component and they don't spend enough time on industry growth. And what I mean by industry growth is that they don't have a robust codes and standards team that actually works hand in hand with sales in order to determine the right path for a company to take when it comes to, again, standard development, product development, conflict resolution, industry awareness, use compliance, and basically being that technical expert that can answer all those tough questions, that can go to a seminar, that can go to teach, like to these meetings around the country, right? Talk about a product. And maybe your product isn't as prominent as somebody else's, but you can fix that with a good codes and standards team. So I think a lot of times, in some companies will put a lot of effort into codes and standards, and some not so much, right? They think that, who needs them? We just make a product. We just sell a product. People will buy our product. It's a commodity. People will buy it anyway. And I disagree. I think that a good codes and standards team can save your company's butt when needed, but they also are natural salespeople because they don't have to sell it by BS. What they're selling is they understand the product and they're very convincing. And if you get a salesperson that is also a technical person, who's also a technical expert, you've created magic. I mean, I have people tell me all the time, Paul, you're this great salesman for wire and cable. And you always hear me go, well, I'm not a salesman. I know I'm a salesman, but I'm a technical guy. So when I sell it, I'm just selling it because I talk technical and I'm not blowing smoke. I'll tell you the good, the bad, the ugly, because I live it. I breathe it every day. And that's a good codes and standards division that do that. So, and there's others that do the same thing. We have a lot of great codes and standards teams throughout the industry for all the major manufacturers, but they always could be better. I usually say ultimately it'll come down to who's driving the ship so that the ship doesn't get lost and it becomes a Titanic, and you get the point. So industry growth, and I think a lot of times people pay way too much attention on an ROI, return on investment, versus the fact that if you don't, what monetary value can you put on industry awareness, making people aware of your product from a technical level to the people that are influential in the industry? Okay. You can't do that from sales. They're usually talking to salespeople to salespeople. Okay. So you need that industry awareness. You need somebody that you can call when the crap hits the fan. And it doesn't mean it's about your product. It could be any product that interacts with your product. And so if that's the case, you need to have conflict resolution, and codes and standards is designed for that. That is what they do. That is our true nature of resolution, is with a codes and standards team. Product development, standard development, use compliance, making sure it's being used in compliance. But that also means talking to the customer and giving possible alternatives to installation methods that are not going to be against the intended use of your product, but maybe thinking outside of the box that they're not aware of. And of course, the technical expertise and industry growth comes from maybe you have a codes and standards division, or maybe you have somebody that's like project manager or product manager or something, but they're not born and bred code people. And so they don't know how to talk to code people. They don't know how to get the message out. So their product will not grow. Now, you put somebody in a team like that has codes and standards experience, you give them the resources, and they will return the investment trifold. They will. You're not going to see it monetarily at first, but I like to tell everybody this. Every specification that's out there from an engineer, for example, that has a company's on it directly, has a leg up in getting a project. If you're not on the spec, you're not going to get on it. And you can't just pick up the phone and call every engineer out there. Okay. It's all about industry. They go to meetings, they go to seminars, they go to things. You have to pay to be on things like Master Spec. You gotta pay to be on things like Spec Link. You've got to pay to play the game. But it all works together, and you have to have people that understand how that works and create a game plan. Now, lastly, I'll talk about education. I think fundamentally, and I've been talking about this for the last 8 years, and many companies now are creating educational divisions. If you go back and look at time, you'll see that they didn't have a real robust educational platform or program. And some companies are slower to develop this than others. But education is so important. Not only the internal education internally to your people, to your reps, but also the end customer. At the end of the day, the customer is who's choosing to use your product, and they want to be educated. And so companies that have a codes and standards team, it just so happens that for me, I am heavily into education, as you know. And so creating educational divisions and academies, how to educate the consumer, at what level you educate, whether it's at a very high level, very technical level, or very basic level, in order to give people an understanding of application and use or code compliance, things like that have to be developed by people that understand the industry. And lucky for me, I understand the industry, so it makes it easy for me to do these things and to walk into these different roles. But a good codes and standards team also has to be given the ability to educate and developing an educational process. And so a lot of companies have created educational divisions, and they've grown to it because they realize that the education fosters many things. Number one, it's a marketing platform. Education will always forever be a marketing platform. People will see it. They become bonded to the product, no pun intended. They understand how it's to be used. They become brand loyal, and they will promote your product, word of mouth. They will say, I use this, I use that. They educated me. I took a class from this or that. That becomes something that very aware that the customer is wanting that education, and you're getting the marketing and brand awareness out of that, right? So that is very important to the process of offering the education. Second thing with the education is it allows the engineers to have lunch and learns, to have training sessions, to attend sessions, webinars, things like that, all created from a product-centric position of explaining all the products so they get to see what you got, but also how they interact with codes, how they interact with standards, and how a codes and standards teams will do that. So a good codes and standards person can do that, can walk that line from education to product. And it's all sales, wrapped around technical, wrapped around education. It's a full platform. It's not done by accident. A good codes and standards can develop those type of things that help the company's awareness, brand awareness, use awareness. And then, of course, it helps educate inspectors. So you have less issues for the contractors. The contractors know how to install the product, know how to use the product. So all of this, believe it or not, stems from its roots in codes and standards. And like I said, education for me has always been a very big thing. Going and being able to do education and develop education. If you're a company out there, for example, that has a very weak codes and standards team, there is something that you need to do right away. You need to reevaluate what your direction is, what authority you're giving your codes and standards team, and whether or not they're providing you the pillars of growth. And that is education, sales, and the technical aspect, wrapping them together in a presentation that can be replicated all over the country. And then what you should do is, if you've got a product, for example, and you're not on specifications, you need to develop a plan for how you do that. Whether or not it's a speaking plan, you go around the country, you meet with people, you develop, however you're going to tackle this, you have to look at what's best for your company. And I tell companies all the time, throw out on the table what you're at now, where you want to be, what do you have to target it? Do you have one guy just runs around the country, or do you have a team that can tackle this? And that's what a codes and standards team does. And building that is not an easy thing. It's taken years for me to build the one that we have at Encore. And I have a great team around me, and they do a wonderful job. So that's the one thing that you have to think about. Codes and standards is vitally important to the success and the ultimate growth of your company. It's not just about the sales. It is really, there's 3 pillars here that you have to focus on. Okay. Sales is just one. That's just one. You have education, and then you have the technical expertise. Those are the things you put together. And I'm just blessed that I've had my foot in all of those at some point in my career, so that I can bring that to the company that I work for. When they want to know, what do inspectors think? Well, I've got an answer for them. Well, what do electricians think? I got an answer for them. What can we teach them? I've got an answer for you, because I can develop an educational program that actually targets a specific audience and why we're doing it, centered around our products. So if you don't have a codes and standards team in your company, think about it. You really need to think about where you want to go. And that's what codes and standards does. It's not just about somebody that alone answers any one thing, like deals with conflict or deals with use compliance or just deals with product development. A good codes and standards team, a good codes and standards leader, and I pride myself as being that, and being visionary in the development. In that process, what you have to have is somebody that's willing to do that and build that. And every company needs that. Okay? If you don't think you don't need a codes and standards team, then you're complacent in where you're at, and you're never going to grow. You're never going to grow because you don't know what's on the other side of the fence. In codes and standards, there is a distinct difference in it. And hopefully I've conveyed to you that's kind of the interaction with the different standards, the interaction with the different, for example, I serve on 2 code panels. Kevin serves on 2 code panels. We've got 4 code panels covered as codes and standards that are germane to our industry. And so at the end of the day, whether I served on code panels or not, it really wouldn't matter to me. The point being is we try to interject ourselves where we need to be in the forefront of this industry and be aware of it. Now, for me, I'm lucky enough to have my foot in a bunch of different industries, and keep an eye out on the different industries, whether it's the connector manufacturers or the device box manufacturers or something like. I'm always watching. And I'm always seeing to make sure that it protects, one, the best interest of the industry that I'm in, and also how it's going to benefit our company. And that's what a good codes and standards person does. They're always looking ahead. How is the industry going to change? How do we need to adapt? And where do we need to get our company to? Okay. Where do we need to get it? Okay. So that's what a good codes and standards team does. Anyway, that's kind of what codes and standards does. Hopefully you got something out of that. Just kind of me rambling here on a Memorial weekend, kind of letting you know from the inside picture of what codes and standards does for a company, and that every manufacturer needs good codes and standards people that understand what it's all about. Till next time, folks, stay safe. God bless.
Shut up and sit down.